The next time you're at the Dollar Tree, head over to the garden aisle and check out the selection of planters. These are great for flowers and plants, but I have a few ideas to show you how to use these around your home also. Small terracotta pots are a great addition to a grapevine wreath, so I want to show you how I put mine together for my front door. I'm using two different sizes of terracotta pots. I have two that are a little bit smaller than the one I'm wrapping with some jute cord. I wanted to prep my pots first before adding them to my wreath form. Now you could do whatever you wanted to these pots. I've seen people use some watered down white chalk paint and they dry brush it to give it a nice aged look. I decided to decorate mine up with just some jute cord, so I wrapped it around the lip at the top of the pot and then I tied a bow with the same jute cord. For the larger pot, I doubled up the jute to tie my bow, but for my smaller pots, I did the same thing with just a single cord. I wanted to make sure that my terracotta pots would be nice and secure on my wreath form, and since grapevine wreaths have such an uneven surface, I didn't think that hot glue would be enough to attach these pots. So I'm taking some floral wire and I ran it up through the bottom of the pot, through the top, and then I just crisscrossed it on the outside. I made sure that I kept the wire on the opposite side of where my bow was, and this just gave me something that I could anchor to my wreath. I did this with all three of my terracotta pots. I didn't film it, but I also added floral foam to the inside of each of my pots before I connected it to my wreath form. Now keep in mind, I'm only using 3 pots for mine, but if you have more on hand or if you wanted a bigger, bolder wreath, you could put pots the whole way around the wreath. I'm just choosing to put mine on one side. So starting at the bottom of my wreath, I placed one of my smaller pots where I thought it looked good, and then I just went to the back side with those floral wire pieces and gave them a few twists so that my pot was nice and secure on my wreath. Then I moved on to my next largest size pot and I placed that above the first pot, and I did the same thing. I just went to the back side of the wreath and gave that floral wire a couple good twists. I made sure that I kept a lot of tension on the wire also so that it was nice and tight up against the wreath. After all 3 of my pots were placed on my wreath, I did go through with a little bit of hot glue on the back side of each of the pots because the surface of this wreath is so uneven. The pots were jiggling around a little bit. Even though I knew they were nice and secure with that floral wire, I didn't want them to bounce around as I was opening and closing my front door, so I did go in with a little hot glue, and anywhere the pot was actually touching some of the branches of the wreath, I added some hot glue for a little extra security. Here's where you can start to get really creative. Since I already have the floral foam inside of the pots, I was able to just start adding in my flower picks. I love the color purple. It always reminds me of my grandma because that was her favorite color. So I'm using some of this purple eucalyptus and I'm putting that in the 2 smaller of the pots. And then for the larger pot in the center, I used some smaller white flowers. But like I said, this is where you can get creative. You can add bigger flowers in here. You could do succulents if you like more of that sleeker look. I like these flowers because they kind of have that cottage, like overgrown wild look, and I think it just looks so pretty. If you've been crafting with me for a while, you've probably seen me use this giant bag of leaves and greenery that I have. These are all leftover scraps from other floral picks. So this comes in handy for this type of project. I wanted to fill in some of the space between all of my pots. So I just grabbed a bunch of random leaves out of my big bag and I started gluing them in between the pots. And I made sure that I glued some of the leaves on the outside edge of the wreath and also on the inside edge of the wreath. I also wanted to add a bow on the opposite side of the wreath to balance everything out. So I took one length of burlap ribbon and I rolled it together, and then I took another length and added it to the back side to create some tails. I cinched everything together in the center, and then using a pretty long length of jute cord, I tied it around the middle. I left the tails on the jute cord long so that I could use that to tie it to the side of my wreath. As a final touch for my bow, I took some of the same flowers that I used in the pots and I glued some around the center of the bow. Planters from the Dollar Tree are also a great way to add some more organization to your home. I'm going to use this planter and some fabric to create a storage bin for my hand towels or washcloths in my bathroom. I picked this planter because I liked the color and the texture of it, and I really liked the pattern on it. It also has a lip at the top, which makes this a lot easier. So I'm using that lip as my guide to attach my fabric, and you can see here that I have my fabric facing with the wrong way out. So I have the print facing towards my planter, and I have all of the length facing down towards the bottom of my planter. And I'm just using a bead of hot glue the whole way around. Now my piece of fabric wasn't quite long enough to wrap the whole way around, but I did have an extra pack, so I just cut an extra strip off for the back side and I glued that into place also. I waited until my hot glue was completely set and nice and cooled down, and then I started pulling the fabric up over the top of the container. So that's why I glued it on the way that I did. So as I'm flipping it over, now the right side of the print is facing outward, and I can use all of that extra material to tuck into the bottom of the planter. Now there was quite a bit of extra material, so I cut off most of the excess. I just needed it long enough to fit down towards the bottom. There was a small piece of cardboard inside this pack of fabric, so I'm using that to create a bottom for inside of my basket. I laid my planter down on top of it and I just traced it around with a pencil. It doesn't have to be the exact size. I just need a circle that will fit into the bottom of my planter. Then with the extra material that I still had left, I hot glued that onto my circle and I cut around the circle, leaving a small border so that I had enough to glue over the edges and finish it off. This little piece of fabric that I have is actually from Joann Fabrics. Unfortunately, my town is one of the towns that's losing our Joann Fabrics. So I was in there and I picked up a few of these, I think they're called fat quarters. They're really handy. I think they're 18 by 21 inches, which is about the same size as the fabric rolls that you get at the Dollar Tree. But they come in handy for smaller projects like this. So you can see here now that I have my fabric cut around my circle, I'm just adding some hot glue and I'm pleating down all of the edges until I have everything covered to the back. And then this circle will just sit down inside the bottom of my basket to make sure that all of that material stays down inside. I was going to stop here and just leave the basket as is, but since I had material left over, I thought I would try to make a bow out of the material. So I took a strip here and I'm folding it into thirds. I'm just using a little bit of hot glue here and there to hold everything in place. And then once I had the material the width that I liked it, I folded it into thirds going the opposite way. This is kind of the same concept when you create a bow out of ribbon. You just create a little loop with the bow. So in this case, I'm creating a loop with my fabric. Then I took the same fabric and instead of rolling it into thirds, I rolled it down just a little bit smaller so that it wasn't quite as wide. And that's what I'm going to use for around the center of my bow. So you can see here, I pleated it in the middle. It kind of looks like a bow tie. And then with that second piece of fabric, I just hot glued it around the center. I thought this bow turned out really cute and it was a great way to use up some of the scraps. Like I mentioned, I'm going to use this little organization bin for my washcloths and hand towels, but let me know in the comments how you would use this around your home. When I saw this 2-pack of planters that had 3 separate sections to it, my mind immediately thought this would make a great utensil caddy for a picnic or a barbecue. And right next to the planters at the Dollar Tree were the solar lights, so I grabbed 2 of those also. Anytime I get a solar light from the Dollar Tree, while I'm still in the store, I pull the little yellow tab out and I always place my hand over the top just to make sure that that light is going to work. This just saves me the hassle of getting the whole way home and realizing that the light wouldn't work. So that's just a little tip tip I have for you. Now, all of these solar lights have a stake in the bottom. We're not going to need that, so you can just pull that out and set it to the side. There is a raised circle at the bottom of this planter, and that's where I want to add my solar light. But because the tube on the solar light is hollow, it wasn't enough surface area that I felt confident that it would stay upright when I glued it in. So I'm taking a small object. This is just a small bottle of paint that I have in my craft room, and I'm tracing it onto some chipboard. You could use cardboard or foam board here too, and I'm just cutting out 2 circles. I don't think I mentioned it, but because this is a 2-pack planter, I am creating 2 of these. One of these I'll keep for when my husband and I go camping, because this will go great on a picnic table, and the other one I'm going to give to my parents because we have a lot of picnics and cookouts up at their house. So you can see my little cardboard circle fits nice in the bottom of the planter. Now, if you watched my last video, you saw that I used this peel and stick wallpaper from the Dollar Tree. I have a few scraps left over, so I thought, why not cover this chipboard with that wallpaper? So I'm just cutting out a circle a little bit bigger than my cardboard circle. I cut tabs the whole way around the perimeter of it, and then I folded the tabs to the back side. This obviously isn't necessary. You're really not going to see it, but I'm always trying to find ways to use up things in my craft room so I'm not wasting anything. So this was a good way to use up some of those scraps. Normally, anytime I'm gluing plastic, I usually like to use a combo of E6000 glue and hot glue for that long-term, short-term hold. But on this day of crafting, I was completely out of E6000. So I'm just going in with a ton of hot glue. I'm gluing the solar light to that little disc that I made first. I added some to the bottom side of the tube, and then it was kind of hard to see, but I did add a big bead of glue all around the outside. Now, to ensure that my hot glue sticks better, I'm taking a nail file and I'm just roughing up that circle in the center of my planter. This will make the surface a bit more porous, and that hot glue should sink into some of those little scratches and hopefully hold this a little bit better. So you can see here where I added that extra amount of hot glue all around the base. And because there is some chipboard showing on the back side, that's also a porous material. So I think the material of the chipboard and the fact that I roughed up that plastic should be good enough for this hot glue to stay. But if it doesn't work out, I'll let you know later on in another video. This is not a new idea. You've probably seen other YouTubers and TikTokers use these Dollar Tree planters to make a side table. So I want to show you my version of one. I got this big aloe plant at Aldi the last time I was grocery shopping, and I wanted a table to raise it up off of the ground so that my 2 dogs, Lucy and Zelda, don't get into it. Here's a fun picture of them in their Christmas sweaters. You can see they're not real thrilled about it. Actually, I think they liked the Christmas sweaters. I just don't think they like getting their picture taken. But anyway, you could see at the beginning there, I had 2 of the larger planters from the Dollar Tree. These are still in just the regular $1.25 section. They do have bigger planters in the plus section, but I didn't need a table that big. Now, to make sure that my 2 planters will adhere together, I'm just taking my sanding block and I'm sanding up the bottoms of them, and then on one of the planters I'm just sanding around the edge to make sure that my glue will stick better when I go to add my charger plate. I was able to get to Michael's and grab myself a tube of the E6000 glue, which is good because for this large of a project I really didn't think that hot glue would be enough. And I also have one of these metal keys for my glue tube. A lot of times whenever I use this in my videos, people ask about it. You can get these on Amazon, or if you have a Sally Beauty Supply near you, you could probably find them there, because these are actually the keys that we use for our color tubes at the salon. If you didn't know, I do work full-time as a hairdresser in addition to making videos here on YouTube. So you can see I added a generous amount of the E6000 along the bottom side of the planter, and then I added some dots of hot glue on the opposite ends of the E6000. I laid my other planter on top and just held it in place until that hot glue had a chance to set. I want to cover up the seam between my 2 planters, so I am just using a little bit of E6000 to start but I'll finish the rest of this with just some hot glue. So I laid a little bit down right where that seam is, and I'm using some white nautical rope from the Dollar Tree, and I wrapped it around the very center of the seam, but I didn't think that that was enough. So I had done one length right where the two planters met, and then I used the same rope and I just added a second row above and below that center, but you could add as much rope as you wanted to here. Now, another thing you might have noticed is I didn't paint any of my planters in any of the projects I did. I think spray paint is the way to go anytime you need to paint plastic, and unfortunately it has turned cold and rainy here again in Pennsylvania, so I wasn't able to use any spray paint, and I just made sure that when I was shopping at the Dollar Tree that I was picking out planters in colors and patterns that I liked and would work well for me. But keep that in mind, if your selection is slim at your Dollar Tree and there's a planter that you really like but you don't like the color, you can always give it a quick coat of paint. Like I said, I think spray paint is the best method for plastic, but if you're using it inside and it's not going to be handled a lot, you could use some chalk paint also. Now, because of my camera setup at my craft desk, it was a little hard to film, so I didn't bother doing that. But I took that charger plate and I did the same thing with some E6000 and some hot glue. I did it around the edge that I sanded on, and I attached my charger to the top side of my mini table. I saw these clear garden dishes at the Dollar Tree, and keeping that same idea of making the mini end table in mind, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use this as my topper to create a small bird bath or a small bird feeder. So I grabbed two different larger planters from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to do the same thing. But before I attach those two together, because this dish is clear and you can see down into the bottom of the planter, I wanted to put something in there just for a little decoration. And if you caught one of my videos a few weeks ago, I used this faux turf mat from the Dollar Tree. I still had a pretty large piece of it left over. So I took my planter and I traced it around on some cardboard so that I could have a circle that I could fit down in the center. I cut the circle out slightly smaller than what I traced at the top so that it would sit down in. And then I used that same circle and I traced it onto the backside of that faux turf mat, and I attached that to my cardboard with some hot glue. Then I was able to just set that circle right down inside of the top planter, so it looks like there's fake grass underneath my clear dish. Putting this together was the same as the mini end table. I'm just using the combo of E6000 and hot glue to attach my clear dish first. So you can see I ran the E6000 along the inside portion of the top container, and then I filled in all the gaps with the hot glue. Now, one thing I will say is because this dish is clear, you could still see the glue from the inside of the dish. Once I actually added water to it, it blended it in and you couldn't really notice it as much. And if you choose to add bird seed to this instead of water, you wouldn't see it at all. But you can see here as I'm pressing it in, it does look a bit messy, but once it was all dried, and like I said, once I added the water, you really couldn't see it anymore. Then I did the same thing to connect the top and bottom, just that combo of E6000 and hot glue. If you wanted to make this craft a little bit simpler and not mess around with that turf mat insert, you could paint the garden dish. I would just suggest painting on the bottom side of the dish and leaving the paint out of the top side, because I don't think it would be a great idea to have paint where the little birdies are going to be hanging out. And also, if you did decide to paint the dish on the bottom side, you wouldn't see any of that glue at all. So if that's something that bothers you, maybe think about doing that. And then just like I did with the mini end table, I wanted to cover up that seam, but this time I just did one length of rope around that seam because this is going to be outside. So I'm not sure how well this will hold up with the weather that we have around here. So I just added one rope, and then for just an extra little decoration, I tied a bow out of the same rope and hot glued that on too. thanks so much for coming to hang out in the craft room with me again today. If you need even more crafting inspiration, check out one of the videos I left on the screen. And if you haven't subscribed, I'd love for you to do that too. All right, everyone, have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.